It was one of the most horrifying mass murders you've probably never even heard of.
This week in Washington State True Crime News, a man was arrested for allegedly burying his wife alive.
This is how one night at university can destroy your life forever.
In the early 80s, some madman turned ordinary bottles of Tylenol into lethal weapons. It was one of the most horrifying mass murders you've probably never even heard of. Our story starts in Elk Grove Village, a suburb outside of Chicago, on an early Wednesday morning in September 1982. Dennis Kellerman was getting ready for work when he heard a crash in the bathroom. His 12-year-old daughter Mary had just gone in there after saying she didn't feel well. She died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. Investigators had no idea what happened. Neither did her father. All he knew was that Mary was staying home sick from school that day, and she took a dose of Tylenol extra strength. Her sudden death seemed like a freak accident. That is, until other Chicago residents started dying under oddly similar circumstances. 27-year-old postal worker Adam Janis was also feeling poorly that day, so he called in sick to work. When Adam and his daughter got home, they ate lunch, and when he was finished eating, he told her he was going to take a couple of Tylenol and lie down for a while. Around 2 minutes later, he stumbled into the kitchen and fell to the floor. A little over 5 hours after Mary Kellerman's mysterious death, Adam was clinging to life at the Northwest Community Hospital, where doctors in the ICU did everything they could to revive him. But his heart was failing. He was pronounced dead that afternoon. Adam's family visited the hospital that day, grieving their loss and looking for answers. Unfortunately, the doctor couldn't give them any. Meanwhile, a few miles away in West Chicago, a 27-year-old mother of 4, Mary Reiner, popped a couple of Tylenols after complaining of post-labor pains. She collapsed and died 2 hours later. 2 more members of the Janis family came back to the hospital with the same symptoms Adam had before he died. Adam's little brother Stanley suffered from chronic back pain. He and his wife Teresa were at his brother's house with the rest of their family mourning when his back started acting up. And he asked Teresa to get him some Tylenol out of his older brother's medicine cabinet. While the bottle was open, Teresa grabbed 2 pills for herself. Something strange was happening. Enter Helen Jensen. The medical examiner's office requested a public health expert to see what was happening. Helen was the one who answered the call. 3 hours later, Helen was at the Janis house to take a look around. But she didn't find anything out of the ordinary. But her mental light bulb switched on after opening the bottle of Tylenol. She realized that 6 pills were missing. It couldn't be a coincidence. 4 people were dying. 31-year-old Mary McFarland was suffering from the same symptoms as the previous victims. She was working a shift when she started complaining about a headache. She ducked into the back room to pop a couple of Tylenols, and a few minutes later, she dropped to the floor dead. Meanwhile, back in Arlington Heights, Helen brought the Janis family's bottle of Tylenol to the hospital, trying to convince investigators that the pain-relieving pills were somehow responsible for the mysterious deaths. The doctor who tried to save Adam's life, the only answer he could come up with was cyanide poisoning. He followed his gut, collected a blood sample from the 3 Janis victims, and sent it to a lab for poison testing. The test results came back showing the lethal contaminant was indeed cyanide. Someone had laced Tylenol pills with enough cyanide to kill a person 100 times over. Johnson & Johnson, the manufacturer of Tylenol, issued a national recall alert. 10 million recalled pills were popped open and tested. 50 were dosed with cyanide. But despite their best efforts, there was one more victim. Investigators found 35-year-old Paula Jean Prince's body on the bathroom floor in her apartment. Investigators moved on to the next step, finding the killer. The best lead came from Johnson & Johnson. They handed over an extortion letter from someone claiming to be the killer, James Lewis. At the time, James was an unemployed accountant living in New York City. Authorities tracked him down after analyzing the thumbprints he left on the letter. The letter began with a rant about how easy it was to contaminate pill capsules. He demanded Johnson & Johnson wire $1 million to a Chicago bank account if they wanted the killings to stop. The company had no intention of paying and immediately contacted authorities. On the surface, James seemed like the perfect suspect. In 1978, he was accused of murdering one of his clients, Raymond West. Investigators believed the killer was James, but the jury thought otherwise and acquitted him of all charges. His testimony also included some other strange details. For example, he described in detail how the killer might have committed the murders. Sounds like he was the guy, right? Well, maybe. But as he explained it, he could tell you how Julius Caesar was killed too, but that didn't mean he did it. Authorities didn't have evidence linking James to the crime. While he couldn't be tried for the Tylenol murders, he was definitely guilty of trying to extort Johnson & Johnson. He was found guilty and served about 13 years behind bars. After he was released, he moved to the Boston area where his legal troubles continued. In 2004, he was charged with kidnapping and sexually assaulting a woman. The charges were eventually dropped after the woman refused to testify. Since then, he's been under the radar, writing novels. To this day, no one is sure who committed the Chicago Tylenol murders.
As if we didn't have enough nightmare fuel, this week in Washington State true crime news, a man was arrested for allegedly burying his wife alive. Just after midnight on Monday, October 17th, a woman was pounding on the front door of a home on Stedman Road in Olympia, Washington. Between the woman's screams and crying, the homeowners realized she was telling them her husband was attempting to kill her. The homeowner called police, and when they arrived, they found that 42-year-old Young Suk An had duct tape on her ankles, wrists, neck, and some left on her face. Her face, hair, and clothing was also covered in dirt. Young told police that her husband was still out in the woods looking for her, and though she was frantic, she was able to tell them her entire ordeal. The woman claimed her estranged husband, 53-year-old Chae Ki-young-an, attacked her around 1 p.m. that day by punching her in the head and throwing her to the ground. Chae then duct taped her ankles, wrists, and mouth, but when he left the room for a few moments, she used her Apple Watch to call 911. The operator alerted police to the call, claiming that they could hear muffled screaming in the background, and then the line went silent. Chae had walked into the room, discovered that she had called the police on her watch, and he destroyed it with a hammer. He then took her from the house by dragging her down the stairs and through the garage before loading her into his van. Shortly thereafter, police arrived to investigate the call but found that the house was empty and the garage door was left open. Chae had driven Young to the nearby woods where he began digging a hole. Once the hole was big enough, he stabbed her in the chest with something sharp, rolled her into the grave, and began covering her with dirt and eventually put a fallen tree over the grave. Young claims that she was in the grave for multiple hours, only surviving by wiggling her face around to create pockets of air. After a while, she got her hands free, dug herself out of the dirt, removed the tape, pushed the tree away, and got out of the grave. When she looked up, she saw that his van was still sitting there, the lights on inside with the windows fogged up, so she took off running. She estimates that she was running for about 30 minutes before she found the porch of the 911 caller. Later that day, someone reported a van parked somewhere in the woods, and nearby, police found a 6x3 shallow grave. Inside the grave were bits of duct tape with her hair. He was arrested later that night, and he'll be charged with first-degree attempted murder, first-degree kidnapping, first-degree assault, and felony harassment to kill. And these charges are all going to include an enhancement for domestic violence. And all of this because she wanted a divorce and he wanted to keep his money.
I'm calling this the most horrific fraternity hazing ever in the United States. This is how one night at university can destroy your life forever. Danny Santulli was 18 years old and a freshman at the Uni of Missouri. In October 2021, Danny was captured on CCTV being blindfolded and led downstairs in an event named Pledge Dad Reveal Night. Danny was made to drink a litre of straight vodka by himself. At around 10:55, Danny collapsed and some of the frat members were seen carrying him to a sofa. Around midnight, Danny was captured on cameras sliding off the sofa, and shortly after he was found unconscious with blue lips. Shockingly, instead of calling an ambulance for Danny, the frat members piled him into a car, dropping him on the way. They drove him to hospital, but at this point he was already in cardiac arrest. Danny had to be resuscitated and spent the next 6 weeks in intensive care. Prior to this evening, Danny had been left needing stitches and crutches after he'd been forced to climb inside of a bin with broken glass inside. 2 nights before the night in question, Danny broke down in tears on the phone to his sister and told her about how stressed he felt about it all. His family had begged him to quit the pledge, but he didn't want to be ridiculed. This is Danny now. He will need full-time care for the rest of his life. He's now severely brain damaged, is blind, and cannot walk or talk. 2 former students are set to go to trial over this case.
Because this is an ongoing case, depending on when you watch this video, some of the information could have changed, it could be different, or some information that could have come out I might not have included. Lola DeVille, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, was a French girl who lived in Paris, and she was just 12 years old when she was murdered. She was reported missing on the 14th of October this month, after not returning home from school. However, sadly, her remains were discovered later that day. She was found in a plastic sort of trunk thing, like a big plastic box, and her cause of death was asphyxiation, but what happened to Lola is truly horrific. She had large cuts on her neck and all over her body, as well as the numbers 0 and 1 written underneath the sole of her feet. She had not only been tortured, but she'd also been essayed as well as murder after that horrific ordeal for a 12-year-old to go through. There are actually suspects in this case, a homeless man and a homeless woman who's 24, and it's believed that the woman is sort of the brains behind it, as the 24-year-old woman was seen following Lola when she left school. The homeless woman was currently living with her sister, who lived in the same apartment block that Lola lived in. This woman was then seen leaving the block with the big old suitcase box trunk thing that she was found in. The reason I'm sort of a bit iffy about what she was found in is because some sources say suitcase, some sources say plastic trunk. It's kind of unsure at the moment. The strangest part is, at this current moment, there's been no motive for the murder. However, what police can't understand is the numbers that were found written on the bottom of her feet. Some theories have explained that maybe they were going to sell her into sex trafficking or something along those lines, but they killed her, so obviously they didn't plan to do that, but I just think that's really, really, really strange. The other suspect is the driver of a vehicle that was used to move Lola's body to where it was discovered, which wasn't actually far from her home, her apartment block. But like I said, this case is still ongoing, and as soon as we have updates, I will inform you.